Good morning. It's an honor to open today the first session of the US-Africa Leaders Summit. It's wonderful to be at the first summit in 8 years, hosted here in the Oprah Winfrey Theater at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. This wonderful museum, as you know, has been designed by an African, Sir David Adjaye, and inaugurated by President Obama in 2016. It means a lot in terms of cooperation between the United States and Africa. It celebrates the legacy of the past, but also it opens on a brighter future. The Atlantic Council's Africa Center I run is honored to cooperate with the White House and the US State Department on these morning sessions focused on creative industries. Creative industries is our signature at the Africa Center. When I started this work, I wanted to first to improve the knowledge of the African continent, a continent very badly known even by Africans themselves, because they have been cut from their roots, from their history, from their stories, to improve the narrative too. I mean, the way we talk about Africans. Everybody talk about Africans, except the Africans themselves, because they don't control the means to tell their own stories. Maybe that is why those stories are so negative, so pessimistic. And the third goal was to instill is to increase the investments on the African continent. Investors are critically important to develop a continent that needs job creation. And through creative industries, you can do all these things. Through creative industries, you can tell a story that is beyond entertainment. It's a key tenet of our strategy. It's about beyond entertainment. It's about promising economic market, a new narrative. It's also about an African soft power. It's about you, global Africa, because Africa is not only on the African continent. Africa is everywhere, beyond the borders, here in the United States, through this African American community we know very well. We represent the French diaspora in Europe, and from there we have been prevented so much from speaking to each other. So I'm very happy today to be here, because as Senegalese, as French, and now here working in the United States, I can finally build this bridge between at least 3 continents and talk to all these diasporas today. That's why it's so important for me to work on creative industries. And when I started this job, my colleagues told me, and what about security? Because Africa is always seen as a threat and not as an opportunity. Okay, security is important. There are so many hotspots, and my friend Fally Ipupa talked about the DRC and the Great Lakes and what people live there. And of course, we have to care about Ethiopia, the Horn, about the Sahel. But Africa cannot be just a problem. Africa is also an opportunity, and through creative industries, we can promote another vision from Africa and put Africa on the map, at the center of the map, at the center of the world. That is even the name of the teaching I provide at Sciences Po Paris and in Morocco, Africa at the center of the world, where it should have been stayed as the oldest continent, the youngest, and soon the largest. All these things make this continent, of course, a very strategic continent, and global Africa is a concept we should cherish beyond our people. I think Africa is everywhere, in the sculptures of ancient Greece, in the pyramids, in Picasso's paintings. So yes, Global Africa is beyond the people. Global Africa is a common value for the whole humanity. And through creative industries, you talk about all these things. And the Africa Center, let me come back to my speech. The Africa Center has convened folks from all over the world to address the importance of this sector. And last year, the first summit on creative industries was in a museum, another museum, the Museum of African Arts, not so far from here, because the Smithsonian Network is doing a tremendously important job. And I noticed that a few weeks ago, the Museum of African Arts organized the return in Africa of Benin bronzes, exactly in Nigeria. So for all this, I'm very proud to be at the heart of this network. Like I said at the very opening of this session, 2 months ago with Director Kevin Young, we organized the first screening of Wakanda Forever, Black Panther. So from the restitution of African arts to Black Panther today, something is great, something is happening around the continent, and I really would like to stress how important it is for this work to be supported. And that's why I would like to finish these remarks by thanking Open Society Foundation, specifically the West African team, for making this morning session possible. Without them, this session could not be possible. Joining us today from the foundation, Véronique Chatelain, Ibu Nyang, and Ayoka Wiles are here, so I would like just to thank them. Yesterday, we also hosted at the Africa Center in another museum, the Rundvik Gallery, another Smithsonian museum. We hosted a dinner with 12 African heads of state. It was a welcome dinner. And among them, Macky Sall, who is the president of Senegal and president of the African Union. And he said the importance of giving Africa the role it deserves as an actor. And really, through fashion, music, gaming, sports, because we also hosted in another museum on the other side of the Atlantic in Dakar, in the Museum of Black Civilizations, an incredible event around sports and soft power with the NBA, which means how important it is, yes, not only to put the continent on the map again and again, but also to promote Africans as actors of their own destiny. So I'm going to stop there because otherwise I will use your time. Special Representative for Commercial and Business Affairs, Dilawar Syed, who is the next speaker. I just would like, before giving him the floor, to stress that after our speeches this morning's interactive discussion will provide a space for Africa creative entrepreneurs to share their experiences and to identify potential solutions to the challenges on this sector. Speakers will also help to highlight areas of collaboration for the US to support Africa creative industries through public-private partnerships, access to finance and investment, and capacity building. So now, it's my pleasure to introduce Special Representative for Commercial and Business Affairs, Dilawar Syed. I would like just to say a last word to introduce him. Special Representative Syed serves as in the State Department's Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs and works to advance trade, commercial, and economic policies for American workers. He leads efforts to support the export activities of US companies through commercial advocacy and to create a level playing field for US companies overseas, so hopefully on the African continent. He previously served on President Obama's White House Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and chaired the White House Initiative on AAPIS, Economic Growth Committee. And he has multiple leadership roles at a number of technology-focused businesses. And with that, over to you, Special Representative Syed. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone, and glad to be here. Thank you, Ambassador Yadav, for your leadership, and I want to also thank Atlantic Council for their incredible partnership working with us at the United States government, various agencies in bringing this incredible Leaders Forum together. You know, I was last night participating in the dinner that Atlantic Council hosted. We had President Sall of Senegal, who spoke eloquently and beautifully about the history, the challenges, but the promise that Africa holds as we move forward. As the ambassador quickly shared, let me just spend a minute on my background and my role. As Special Representative of Commercial and Business Affairs, I run commercial diplomacy globally for the U.S. at the State Department. And part of my job is to make sure that the U.S. private sector's voice is heard, but also that we get to partner very closely with entrepreneurs, with innovators, with creative entrepreneurs like yourself. And there is just so much potential for us to move forward, especially as we get to convene the entire leadership from Africa. Prior to joining the administration, I was in the tech world. I spent more than 2 decades in Silicon Valley building software companies, consumer media companies. And I'm also, let me also mention, I'm also a part of a diaspora group. As an Asian American, I have seen personally the power and resourcefulness of diasporas, especially when it comes to building new industries. Almost 1/2 of all tech founders in the United States are of Asian descent, and many of them were born outside the United States. They have been able to leverage their relationships, their resourcefulness, but very importantly, their understanding of the world, the regions where they come from. So when they build those products, they truly have a global lens. So there's a lot that we can leverage from that experience as we look at the African diaspora. Now, when it comes to African diaspora, we have 2 million Americans of African descent who have adopted the United States in recent decades. But there is 15% of us that are also of African descent, African Americans. So this diaspora is powerful. It is huge. And let me just say this, it is us. So that's why when we talk about the African diaspora, we say it very simply, Africa is us. And so when it comes to US creative entrepreneurs, and I've met some of you in the back room, you have a huge opportunity to work with this incredible asset that we have in the United States, with the affinity, the cultural affinity folks have, relationships they have with Africa, and their desire, strong desire to support you. Now, as creative entrepreneurs, as Ambassador Yadav mentioned, I think you are in a unique role. You're in a unique, I would say, historic role that not only you get to build great companies, but you actually get to shape and own the narrative for Africa. And we know this, that Africa as a continent has faced probably some of the most darkest moments in human history. We have to be clear about that. But we're also faced with such incredible opportunity at this time. When you look at the role of tech, the fact that we're all coming together post-COVID, there's an opportunity for us to build on this moment. Now, in terms of value creation, we already are seeing some opportunity being realized. We saw that numbers like $4.2 billion worth of economic activity that is directly attributed to creative entrepreneurs from Africa. We understand that over the next 6 years, we'll have at least 3 million jobs being created in the creative industries in Africa. We think that's just the beginning. And there's so much more that we can do. Now, when it comes to State Department, there are a couple of areas where we are focused on, where I'm focused on as a special rep. Number one is to help ensure that you have access to financing and funding. So yesterday, we were very pleased to host 15, some of the largest institutional investors at the State Department. These large pension funds, big banks, came together, and we heard the feedback as to how do we ensure that they have access to the African market. We can remove some of the roadblocks. So one day, that asset class, the venture dollars, could flow to many of you. So you could start your businesses, you could scale your businesses. The second is about IP. The very nature of your product is one that we want to make sure that your product, your IP is protected. Obviously, we want to make sure the US content is well placed when it comes to IP, but we want to also make sure that you all feel confident as you build your enterprises. So to that end, we will partner with governments around Africa to help ensure that IP regulations are modernized. And entrepreneur, when they are writing their business plan or their creation at the back of the envelope, can feel very confident that it will be protected. So with that, let me leave you with one quick advice. I know many of you have come from around the continent. One of the best things we get to do as diplomats is to help convene our partners around the world. It's an incredible opportunity for you to meet folks from around Africa, but also from folks from across the United States. Make the most of it. Build these relationships. Many of these folks will open doors for you in ways that you can't even imagine. So with that, thank you. Again, honored to be here, and I appreciate your being here, and I hope you have a productive summit. Thank you.
Please welcome Toyin Uwesu Uhuebu and today's panelists to the stage.
Wow, good morning. Still good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited about joining this panel and leading as a moderator. As you all know, the African film and TV industry is rapidly expanding, reaching new audiences across the world. Through storytelling, filmmakers and producers across the continent are showcasing their diversity of the continent, giving global audiences a renewed look into African culture, lifestyle, and building bridges between Africa and its diaspora through entertainment. So, just to give you a little background about this session, we are going to take a deep dive into owning the narrative, how effective public-private partnerships are, and the growth of the film and TV and music sector, and how these sectors can become engines for culture, economy, and growth. So I would like to begin by introducing our esteemed panelists. And first I have to my left, Dorothy Gituba. Dorothy is Netflix's Director of Local Languages series in Sub-Saharan Africa. Dorothy has been tasked with working with African creatives to tell and take African stories to the rest of the world. Welcome, Dorothy.
Thank you so much.
Next, we have Jason Chukwuma Njoku. Jason is the founder of Njoku Holdings, a family-owned global internet investment holding company, which builds and invests primarily in Nigerian digital consumer market, media, and entertainment. Over the last decade, the company has created some of the largest and well-known startups out of Nigeria, including Iroko TV, Rock, which is a content production and linear TV and distribution, and a new startup, Raptures Entertainment, creating original and webtoons, comics, and animations. Welcome, Jason. And next we have Amarachi Nwosu. Amarachi is a Nigerian-American self-taught filmmaker, artist, writer, and producer. She is also the founder of Melanin Unscripted, a creative studio and media platform that produces stories, conversations, and experiences centered around underrepresented narratives that are both timely and timeless. And I would also like to say she's a fellow Temple Owl.
All righty.
Welcome, Amarachi. And next we have Linus Idahosa. He is the founder and president of the Del York International Group and the visionary behind the Del York Creative Academy, one of the largest international schools for film and television in Africa. Welcome, Linus.
Et ensuite, nous avons Wilma Allen. Ouima est cofondateur du Laboratoire international des écrivains, qui est un programme.
Vision. The program showcases African writing talent, connects the film and television ecosystems to Hollywood's creative talent and content buyers, facilitates deals for writers, and catalyzes job creation and investment into the creative sector. Welcome, Wilmot. And last but not least, we have Tunde Ajaba Ogundikpe, popularly known as Tunde. He's a first-generation Nigerian-American music tech executive, podcast host, and entrepreneur. Tunde currently serves as the SVP and GM of African Music Strategy and Culture at Sony Music, The Orchard. And lastly, Tunde also hosts an African pop culture podcast called No Wahala, along with his co-host, Bao Lawal. Thank you. So I'd love to get this conversation started, and I have a couple questions for our panelists, and then we will also open it up to attendees here as well for questions. So my first question is to you, Jason. What are the biggest barriers to exporting African content to global markets? And what early steps did you take with Iroko TV to either eliminate or minimize these barriers?
So I think, obviously, thank you for being here, et cetera, protocols, all adhered to. In really simple terms, I think what definitely Nigerians have, they have an embedded audience everywhere in the world. So here in North America, across Western Europe, in other parts of the world, wherever you find typically Nigerians, they love their own culture. So they go into Nigerian churches, they eat Nigerian food, they listen to Nigerian content. So you actually have an embedded audience everywhere. I think the key thing is you have to find content which works for them. So my view is always that you have to go like narrow and deep. So if you go in Nigeria, you have to go like really Nigeria, you have to go like really local so they understand it, right? You know, people are looking for like a watered down version of what they know because they're so far away from home. I find that like, you know, the more Nigerian you make it, the more local, the more, if you go in Igbo, you go Ibotic. If you go in Yoruba, you go, you know, full throttle. You don't water it down. You literally have to give it, have to sort of like go that way. I guess just to sort of like kind of crystallize that. If a song gets big in Lagos, it gets big around the world. So it's very rare you find a song that gets big a Nigerian song that gets big in the West and then comes back into Nigeria. So if it's not banging on the streets of like Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, then it's not really doing anything or shaking anything in a great way. So I think the important thing is just to know who you are and just basically export that version, because that's what people really want.
Facts, all facts. Thank you for that. So my next question is to Amarachi. Through your work at Melanin Unscripted and projects in major markets around the world, I've had a chance to look at some of your great work. What opportunities and trends are you seeing in the short form digital media space for content creators? You know, we have, this is a Young Leaders Forum. That's definitely a space that is rapidly growing, especially with social media. So I'd love to hear, some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so in case you guys can't hear me, I'm not sure if my mic is working, but as a self-taught filmmaker, I've directly firsthand I've learned how the digital landscape has really changed things, especially because like I taught myself through YouTube. Many of us have gone through YouTube University, and so I remember coming up and like thinking about being a young person that's Nigerian American. I would be bringing photos, for example, to just share with people, hey, like this is what Africa actually looks like. And so in order to change that narrative, and what we have with this digital landscape now is I don't need to bring a photo into my classroom. I can now show them on my story, on my phone. Every one of us who has a phone right now is a storyteller because we have the ability to write our story, to share our story, but also be our story. And we have access to that. One of my first documentaries I did was called Black in Tokyo. I lived in Tokyo for 2 years. And before I came, I didn't know what the Black experience would be like. But I decided to actually navigate that, but also share share that with people. I was able to film it with my own two hands by myself and along with some team members in my class, but also the opportunity for the internet is to be able to collaborate with your peers. You don't have to always look up or try to find someone on LinkedIn. It could be your friend, it could be someone in your community. We have the ability to collaborate in that sense and tell our stories. So I was able to package this, put it together, edit it myself, share it, and reach over 1.6 million viewers on YouTube. What would have happened? Thank you so much. It's like, would that have been possible 10 years ago? And because of that, because of taking the risk and not waiting for gatekeepers to validate me, because I know that I have a story to tell and I'm worthy to tell that story. And every single person in this room has a story to tell. You're a change maker, which is why you're here in this room. You've been selected to be in this present room. And so because of that, sharing that story and being able to, I was able to go from doing Black in Tokyo to doing my first feature-length documentary called The Ones Who Keep Walking, which is about African creatives. We work with over 250 creatives across the continent, many of them who are also self-taught, that learned from the internet, learned from putting out their work. A lot of this was their first feature-length projects for a lot of them. And because they took the risk to put out their work and share their stories, we were able to pay attention and share that. But for many people, they don't see that possibility because they feel like they have to get access to a major film executive. But we know now that we don't have to do that. And so really, it's just about telling our stories. If you have a phone and you have a story, you can share it. Don't wait for anybody, but be willing to put it on these platforms because you can find your consumer and you're limitless, you're boundless in that sense.
Thank you. Great words of advice from real experience. And so I know you touched upon digital, but I want to kind of bring this back to the film space. And Tunde, I'm looking right at you. You've been at the center of music and film in many of the projects that you've worked on, and one very recently, Woman King. I'd love to, just hear from you as to what are some of the trends and opportunities you're seeing as far as like African content and stories going global and, just becoming more widely accepted in more audiences.
Thank you, Toyin. Before I start, I want to give a shout out to Jason because I didn't know he was going to be on this panel, but I'm actually a huge fan of him, and I honestly think that I wouldn't have been able to do what I did at Spotify and even now at Sony without seeing Jason's work. I was raised in Connecticut, but very immersed in a very Yoruba Nigerian household, and seeing people like Jason create things for the continent, by the continent, and create streaming services and empowering creatives inspired me to be able to tell stories and advance narratives with the resources I had as well, right? So we talk about the work that we've been doing at Sony with like The Woman King and prior with projects like Black is King, Beyonce. It's been really, really great to see narratives concerning Africa penetrate the pop culture space in ways that I don't think we've seen to this level ever, and probably most comparable to maybe like the early 2000s when the internet started to kind of become something that was penetrating African homes. It's really cool to see stories that are authentic or as authentic as possible being told by our people and to our people. Black Panther was another wave that we can talk about where a narrative was driven by Marvel, right? But then also the soundtrack for that picture shook everyone, like pulling all these African artists from across the continent and creating a narrative through music that was able to not just fit the film, but propel the film into a different space. I think those are important. I think more of that is coming. And yeah, I think that trend is something that's gonna hopefully go upwards.
Great, I couldn't agree more. We're seeing that in just more films that are on their way. And as more music is coming out of different countries, not just Nigeria, but across the continent, and people are picking them up, and just it's everyday music. So I couldn't agree, like I said, couldn't agree more. I'd like to turn to you, Wilma, and also just talk a bit about, some of the work that you've done with International Writers Lab. What advice do you give fellows trying to navigate some of the business elements that they will face, such as contract negotiations, financial marketing, and distribution? Because there's always the creative side, but there's also the business side, which is very important, and I'd love to hear your advice on that.
Sure. So in the spirit of acknowledging the influence of peers on the panel, I just want to say thank you to Dorothy Katuba, because when I arrived in Kenya about 6 years ago and was interested in film, through her company Spillworks, she took me in and took me around the ecosystem and explained to me how things work there. The International Writers Lab was founded in 2021, and being very intentional about connecting the Hollywood ecosystem with that of Africa, and more specifically, historical diaspora with contemporary diaspora with the people of Africa. Very intentional about that. And one of the things that we've done is also be very strategic about our partnerships. So myself and Pauline Fisher of Pauline Fisher Media, who worked at Netflix back in the day. Some of you may not remember, but you watched Netflix on DVDs. So back in the day, she was part of the acquisitions group and actually helped acquire Beast of No Nation with Mr. Elba. And also the Black House Foundation, which is a trade association that promotes diversity in Hollywood. We had other sponsors, local as well as international. And the reason that background is so important is because we fit them all in. I forgot one, Color Entertainment. So for those who are in Hollywood, Color Entertainment, like Black House, has been a staple of promoting diversity. And so the way we structure our program is that we have a masterclass format for experienced television film writers and now moving into animation. There's also a pitch fest, so we brought in Hollywood executives, agents, and others for them to pitch to, so they understand the pitching process and how to brand. But because the foundation is writing, we really wanted to focus on getting them exposure to experienced writers. So the person who facilitated our first cohort of film writers was Matty Rich. You guys may remember straight out of Brooklyn. Am I dating myself too much? But he's also at the American Film Institute. And now we're going to be working, hopefully, with Pat Charles on television. Sons of Anarchy, Iron Fist, those are more contemporary. But the way we've done it, more specific to your question, is by also getting them exposure to programming. So we took them to film festivals. We were planning to take them to Sundance, but because of COVID, it was virtual. But we did take them to Jeff Friday's wonderful American Black Film Festival in South Beach. And so there are classes there. But hands-on experience, it was because we optioned the scripts through Pauline Fisher Media. And so by taking them through the process of understanding the different windows of their properties and how to kind of negotiate so that they can stay involved in the project through a legal agreement, not only was it helpful for them, but also for their attorneys who may not have been familiar with the Hollywood sort of legal apparatus and the way it works. And so the courses at places like ABFF, the Black House, are ways in which we give them tools, but also, I think from my experience, just understanding some of the larger ecosystem and trade and investment and the country differences over the time I've been in Africa, we've also been able to get perspective from different ecosystems within Africa about budgeting, about different aspects of really negotiation and the way legal agreements when it comes to television and film work.
And I think it's very important that you mentioned the work that you've done in going to different countries and really understanding that, yes, one continent, but there are differences. And so being able to know that what might be work in Nigeria may not necessarily be the same process in Kenya is really important. As we're on the topic of work and supporting content creators, Linus, I'd like to talk to you about some of the work that you've done, and what do you recommend for creators who are working in a place where the necessary infrastructure or equipment isn't available, or there aren't people around them with the technical skills they need to support their work?
All right, thank you very much for that question. So I think beyond anything else, that Africa as it stands needs a very bold vision. And it starts with understanding first what it is that we have as a people. Over the past 10 to 12 years, we've been actively involved in building capacity for those in the creative industry across the continent. But we understood something very clearly. We understood the fact that we needed to be in a space where the types of creative content coming out from Nigeria, which is our place of origin, was that could compete favorably with any production house anywhere in the world. And so we had a 10-year plan. It was very clear. Identify strategic institutions in the States. Ensure that these are institutions that are familiar with hands-on training programs. And then seek for new ways to bridge the gap between academia and industry. Knowing that Nigeria as an industry has grown to become the second largest film industry in the world, with little or no support from the government or the private sector, it grew organically itself. The time had now come for an infrastructure that would help take the industry to where it needs to be, in terms of a home where filmmakers can, within themselves, create an ecosystem that will move the continent forward. And so, having trained over 5,000 people from across the continent, one of the things we've seen, and with your question that you mentioned, is I personally have seen some of the most creative people in the world come out of our programs and from the continent. And these are people who otherwise will never have the opportunity to express the depth of their artistry or creativity to the world unless given an opportunity. And so I think it's what we now decided to do after doing this series of programs is that right now we have decided to set up what is called the Lagos Film City in partnership with the Lagos State government to build an infrastructure that will help identify this skill set across the continent, but at the same time, give them the opportunity to produce content that can compete globally, all across the world. Just 2 weeks ago, one of the lecturers who came in from here, we went to a set and we saw a young Nigerian using firecrackers on his shirt to simulate a gun scene. And I didn't understand how that was possible, right? And what you find is there is ingenuity on the continent. This is a decade for African storytelling. You can see it everywhere. But how do we mobilize the energies of these creatives to be able to produce something that will shift the conversation of the type of content that comes from Africa to the world? And I think that there is no better chance than now to get that on the road. Thank you.
Thank you. You've touched on a lot of great points, and panelists, you've given some great feedback. So I have one last question here, and Dorothy, you know this is for you. So we've talked about film, we've even talked about digital from a social perspective, but I'd love to hear from you about how the rise in streaming platforms have impacted the African entertainment industry, and what opportunity does it afford to African filmmakers and also the audiences?
So I'll start by saying that in front of us we have a clock here and it's telling me that I don't have time. But I'm going to plug Netflix because everybody's plugged their company. I'll tell you this. We are in the business of entertaining the world. And what is exciting about this is that Africa is part of the world. And so in 3 ways I can answer your question. One is that African storytellers are owning their narrative. And we know that in the past, our narrative has not been our own. So this is what streaming platforms like Netflix are doing. They're saying to African creators, you tell your stories, you tell it to your people, to the local audiences. This is why I'm excited being part of the local language team. First, entertain your audience, and what a joy it is to see yourself, your stories, people like you on screen. That's amazing. Then we take it to the next level. The stories are going around the world. Netflix, 220 million plus subscribers, with a switch across the world. So our stories are now going across the world. That's what's really exciting. That is something that streaming platforms like Netflix are doing. The third thing, investment in the industry, growing the creative sector. This bar none. Netflix is doing it. Streaming platforms are doing it. But I can say, because I see it every day, I work in a team that is dedicated in building the capacity in Africa. So behind the screen, in front of the screen, writers, producers, we are investing in them. We are actually putting dollars behind growing them. Number two, storytellers of tomorrow who've arrived today. Let me tell you, you get scholarships for programs when you're an engineer and a doctor, you want to be a lawyer. But then, not very many people go behind creatives who want to study in university, and we are catching them now, and we are saying, here, we are going to help you. We are going to help you, and my colleagues are in the crowd, and they're behind these amazing programs. But in a third and final way, in a proper, tangible, monetary dollars and cents way, we are putting money in the economy. We are putting money in the creative industry. We are investing in television shows, we're investing in films, we're investing in animation. And money is being put in the pockets of the creatives, being put in the production houses' pockets, and we are growing the industry. And it goes beyond just the industry and the ripple effect. The costume designers, the folks who are catering, it is a ripple effect. And so I can say that streaming platforms are making a tangible difference in the entertainment sector for both the creative practitioners, but also the audiences.
And growing the economy, because like you said, it's not just in front of the scenes, it's behind the scenes, all of the jobs that are being created.
100%.
And I think that that's something that we can also take away from this panel. You know, as far as owning the narrative in this space, the creative economy really is an engine for not just culture, but economic growth, job creation, and therefore the right investments and the right support are also needed to really grow this economy and, of course, build bridges between the United States and countries in Africa. So I know we are at time, and I promised some Q&A, but I think our panelists will be, some of them will be available, and we'll be able to take some questions maybe one-on-one after this. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Feel free to stretch your legs, but our next session will be starting momentarily, so please do not wander outside of the mags. You will have to be remagged. Thanks.